guys. Kurt Vonnegut once wrote about an alien who landed on Earth on top of a hospital. And as the alien looked down from this perch, an ambulance rolls up to the bay doors of the emergency room, and doctors and nurses and EMTs flood out to provide the patient with life-saving care. And the alien just looks down and says, "What a helpful species, what a good planet." Cynically, there might not be many other opportunities where this alien just happens to land and he sees that side of us. But I venture to say, if he landed in Death Valley National Park sometime in mid-July, the alien would come to that conclusion. This is the background for the Badwater Ultramarathon, which is a 135-mile foot race through Death Valley in the summer. In order to complete this, runners will traverse the pavement, but they don't do it alone because they all have a crew, so maybe anywhere from 2 to 6 people, and crew vehicles will leapfrog them the entire distance. So much like these doctors and nurses, the crew members are providing sometimes life-saving care to their runners, literally spraying them down with water, providing food, water, ice, whatever it takes to make sure their runners are healthy and moving forward. When I found out that Badwater existed, that this was a thing, that people ran 135 miles in Death Valley in the summer, I was hooked. I was put on this earth to run that race. And it changed my life. I wasn't even really a runner then, and I definitely had never completed a marathon, but I decided that was a good place to start. So I signed up for my first marathon, and it went terribly. But when I got to the finish, I was like, man, I don't have another meter of running left in my body, let alone a mile, and could not for the life of me imagine why people would want to go farther, how they could, or why that happens. But I was still hooked, and as you forget with these things, as often happens, is you forget how badly it physically hurts. So my next move was that I signed up for a marathon that would prepare me for a 50-miler a few short weeks later. That second marathon went much better, and I showed up to the 50 ready to go. And honestly, I couldn't have asked for a better introduction or exposure to the community and sport that is ultra running. Between those marathons, I was in a time in my life that was very turbulent, very troubled, and a lot of pain, a lot of heartache. And had an alien come down and ask me what I thought about this planet or humanity, I wouldn't have really had much good to say. So when I showed up to that 50, it was a very life-changing event because as you run through these races, you're never really alone. There's tons of other runners with you, and you roll up to aid stations. And at the aid stations, you might show up completely exhausted, trashed, tired, freezing hot, needing Vaseline, all these things you probably wouldn't tell perfect strangers. But you roll up and you say, I'm tired, I'm hungry, I need lube, whatever it is. And whether you're spending 30 seconds or 3 minutes in an aid station, often the concern that these perfect strangers are giving you, the food, the whatever, just the attention and the care that we all give each other on the trails and at these aid stations is so rejuvenating that anytime I've limped into an aid station, I've always been able to run away. And I've always finished these races. So when I finished that 50 and I saw that kindness from strangers and just the healing power of people coming together and going towards a common goal, when I finished, I had so much juice in my legs, just so much energy and so much I could keep going in me that I crossed that finish line and I knew I was running a 100-miler next. So I signed up, and that next fall I showed up in my first 100. And I had no idea what I was doing, and I was going to rely mostly on my stubbornness and finding probably some salty, very experienced ultra runner to help guide me through this process. And sure enough, I find a guy who's done tons of these things, and I tag along with him for as long as I can, which is about 20 hours. And then I fall apart physically, and he goes on, but I keep trucking. And by this point, I have my sister pacing me, so she's on the trail with me, and I'm running in and out of aid stations, or crawling in and out of aid stations, as it were. And there's moments where I'm like, my patella is in so much pain, I'm pretty sure my kneecap is going to explode off my leg. Those were legitimate thoughts in my head. But I said, I've already come this far, maybe at mile 70 or 80. Who needs a kneecap? And I wanted to be part of this community of people that just kept on going. I wanted to be a 100-miler. So I decided it was worth it and just kept on trucking along. I finished that race, and it took me just a little less than 32 hours, and it is my benchmark for, oh my God, that hurts. So I've never done that again. But when I got off of crutches a few weeks later, my family was very shocked because they saw the physical devastation, but I signed up for another 100, and another, and another, and another, and it just kept on coming because I was hooked. And every time I signed up for a race, it was always with Badwater in the back of my mind. Like, how can I pick the hardest races I can to build that resume, to apply, to get the requisite experience so that someday when I have everything aligned, that I will have my shot at Badwater. Finally, the year came. I'd built the legs, I had the time, most likely promised off of work, I'd saved the money, had people who were probably willing to crew me, so this was my time. I had the requisite number of races, I threw my name in the hat and applied. I waited very anxiously for a month, and a month later I get an email. It says, congratulations, you've been selected as a 2012 Badwater Ultramarathon runner. I'm by no means a sprinter. I'm very much an endurance athlete. But when I got that news, I was so overjoyed and so stoked. I just was flipping around and skipping and frolicking and hooping and hollering. And my friends asked, oh my God, you must have won the lottery. I say, no, I'm running 135 miles in Death Valley in the summer, and it is better. And it's true, I was so stoked. Just so excited for that. And so I got busy training for it, both for the distance and for the heat, which involved me being in a sauna for hours on end and a lot of clothes. It was a lot of laundry, but it was a labor of love. Then one day, in an out-of-sauna experience, I was traveling to go to a race I was going to use as a training run, and I happened across another ultra-running friend. And we decided to go for a friendly run, as ultra-runners do. And he knew the trail, so he picked the area. And the course we were going to do was we would go from the bottom of this mountain, go to the top of this mountain, and back down. Friendly enough. Well, I grew up in Delaware, so woo! First date. You guys know, and as I know, that mountains are kind of a new concept to us. So mountain weather was not something I was really familiar with. So it didn't occur to me that whatever the story is at 7,000 feet wouldn't necessarily be the story at 9,000 feet, which we would have to get to come back down. I knew that a storm was forecasted that day, but being kind of arrogant and these runners that we were, didn't think it would really affect us. So even with that in mind, we took off on this run. And he picked the course, and of course it wasn't the trail because that would make sense and that would be, safe. But we took the face of the mountain that was much more rugged. We had a boulder. So as I'm scrambling up these big rocks and I'm bouldering, the only thing in my head is like, I look good right now. I'm athletic. I hope he's watching because there's these really technical moves that I'm doing. And not for a second am I wondering, how am I going to reverse this and get back down? But it doesn't matter because we're awesome and we're going to make it to the top. So as it forecasted, it starts to rain a little bit, which is at first just a minor annoyance. But we're about dressed for something on par with maybe a 5K in a park on some nice summer day. So it's quickly apparent that this minor annoyance is now soon to be life and death. And sure enough, as we keep climbing, because I couldn't reverse those moves, I couldn't come back down, it was too slick on these boulders, it was life and death. We both looked at each other and said, this is no longer run, this is now, we could die. And two things came to my mind as I looked around and knew that we just had to calm down. One was that my friend was 2 weeks away from graduating from college with a degree in anthropology. If he had any hope of paying back those student loans with that degree, it is so hard to put that degree to use alive, we had to get him out of there alive for a fighting chance. And for me personally, I knew if I died on that mountain that day, I will have lived and died on this earth having not yet completed Badwater. That was not okay. So that galvanized the resolve to just calm down and to make forward progress. So our options were we could try and descend, but it was way too slick, and we'd risk plummeting. We could hang tight, nobody knew where we weren't dressed for it, we'd probably freeze to death. So our option, and our only really fighting chance, was to keep climbing, risk plummeting somewhere up there or freezing to death, but at least we had a fighting chance. So we're climbing, and by this point it's snowing because we're going higher in elevation, and the visibility is nothing. And there's moments when it's so slick and so icy on the ground, he has to literally hold my wrist up like this and pull me across these traverses. And finally we make it to the top of this mountain at 9,000 feet, and the wind is coming, and there's more snow, and there's no shelter up there, so we still have to make it down. But he knows the trails. So we find the trailhead, and we start bombing the trail back down, and as the snow turns back to rain and the snow on the ground turns back to mud, we knew we made it. And we both walked away from that situation alive, with all of our limbs, all of our fingers and toes. I carried with me from that experience, though, for months afterwards, a very tactile reminder. I lost feeling in my fingertips So for months afterwards, I touched anything. It just brought me back to the arrogance that put me in that situation and what it took to get off of that mountain. So I had that with me. I got home from that trip, still maybe a month and a half, 2 months away from Badwater, and it was my time, I suppose, because this is the part of my story that is a huge part of my life, but it's not often discussed, is that sometimes I get incredibly depressed, and there was in no way I was going to be training or in a sauna. I just couldn't do anything. And days went by when I wasn't logging miles, I was logging days lost, and I just couldn't really care. And I thought about not going. I was like, that might be a disappointment, I just won't go. And my sister calls and says, Hannah, just get on the plane. Just get on the plane and go to Death Valley. I promise it'll be okay. I say, okay. And I get to Death Valley, and I'm around people who light up when they talk about Badwater, and you see that white line that people run on so their shoes don't melt. And I knew it was where I was supposed to be. So stoked. And I was able to forgive myself for not training like I wanted to, because I was there and I was so happy and so grateful for that opportunity. And with the care of my crew, I finished that race in 34 hours, 26 minutes, and 5 years. My friend was on my crew, and even though I got so much more out of the experience than I ever could have dreamed, I was completely in love with the race and wanted to go back, weekend after weekend if I could. It wasn't my year the next year. So my friend, we bonded initially on these trails on this island, talking about the day we would grow up to be Badwater runners. And it was his turn to put in the application. So he put his name in the hat, and we waited anxiously. And a month later, he gets an email, and I get a text. It says, Hannah, I got into Badwater this year, and I want you to be my crew captain. And again, still not a sprinter, still very much an endurance athlete. I take off whooping and hollering and skipping and frolicking, and my friends are like, oh my God, you're running Badwater again. I say, no, my friend is, and I'm crewing, and it is better. And it was. I was so happy for him. I was so excited to be able to return this favor. But even with all that excitement and how much I felt I owed him, it wasn't enough to offset the next bout of depression I was going through. And what I went through then was some of the darkest and most just completely obliterating depression I've ever been in my life. And I stopped running. I couldn't answer the phone when people called. I couldn't do laundry. I wasn't running. I wasn't doing anything. I couldn't care. And there was weekends where I said, I could train my body to run for 34 hours. I'm going to train my body to sleep for 34 hours. So I would embark on these unbadwaters because I just didn't want to necessarily be conscious. And it was pretty all-encompassing. But I realized at a point that what I was doing was completely unsustainable and completely not healthy. So I limped into an aid station known as a mental health clinic, and I started an aggressive treatment for my depression. This is a couple months before Doug's Badwater, and while I had some progress and I felt much better and I could care about things again, I still felt like I didn't do him justice. I can't do this. I'm going to be a disappointment again. I don't feel like an ultra runner anymore. If I go there, I won't be accepted, whatever other fears I get. My sister, again, says, Hannah, we're going through this again. Get on the plane. Just go to Death Valley. Get on the plane. I say, okay, I can't believe we're doing this 2 years in a row, but I'll just follow your advice. We'll do this. So I get on the plane, and sure enough, I get back to Death Valley, and I'm back around the people who light up when they talk about this race, and they're so stoked, and back in that heat, and all is forgiven. And our team, we loved our runners so much. We just operated with such singularity of purpose. It was incredible. We loved our runner so much. Literally from mile 17 on, whatever it took, we were behind him every step of the way, spraying him down, making sure he had what he needed. And with our help and watching him do an amazing athletic performance, he crossed the finish line in 29 hours, 34 minutes, and 10 years. And it was one of the happiest, most proudest moments of my life to watch him finish. I used to say that Badwater saved my life, and I think I believe that still to an extent, but what I see now is that it's not the race, because that's really just a placeholder. It's more the community of people that I've been exposed to doing these races. What I think primarily was so initially powerful and appealing to me was not necessarily that people are running this distance in this heat, But as you watch people talk and do Badwater, you're watching people do what they love with people that they love. And I think more than I wanted to be an ultra runner, I wanted to be someone who does what they love with people that they love. And through ultra running, I'm so grateful that that has been part of my story. So my hope is not that everyone goes out and runs Badwater, but it is that you find your equivalent, whatever it is that lights you up, and maybe the people that also light you up. So I hope you find a community that by your involvement in, you make it better, and that they make you better. I hope that you have maybe the 1 or 2 people in your life who will call you to tell you to get on that plane, or maybe help you off that mountain. I hope that as we're going through these things that we're stoked on, we maintain these powerful communities that help us through whatever it is we're going through. And then if aliens come down on this earth, we're good ambassadors and people are good. Thank you.